For this episode, I'm going to look at macro fundamentals, specifically looking at variables. For any of the macro fundamentals, when you're doing a script, you're going to have four basic components, and that's going to be a variable, a top-level object, flow control, and then some sort of command to execute. There's no specific order that you need to look at this stuff in, so we'll just go ahead and look at variables first. So in order to have variables, you're going to have to create something. The command to create a variable in MQ2 is /declare, like this. So you're going to /declare a name of whatever variable you want. You're going to put in a type. The type is going to be a string of letters, a number, a decimal point number, a timer, or a boolean true false. There's a couple other ones that aren't really used that often, so I'm not going to cover them. And then you're going to put a scope, which is, do you want this to only run during the subroutine? Do you want it to only run during the macro? Or do you want it to always run even when the macro is not running? Or do you want it to work? And then you're going to put a default value if you have one. So what does that look like? So say I'm going to declare my var as an integer and an outer. So my variable is now a number that I haven't assigned a value to. If I want to create something locally and I don't want to put a value there, I could put like a string. So the default type is always a string, the default scope is a local, the default value is empty or nothing. So we can just see what that looks like in the actual editor. So I have a couple things here already declared, but we can go ahead and declare again. Declare my name string outer test. So this means that the variable my name is now going to return the word test whenever I access it. Think of this name as a box, and think of this as the contents of the box. So whenever I'm accessing the box name, what I actually want is this value or the box contents. So if I was to echo my name, it should say test. And let's take a look at what that looks like. So test. And create some more variables. Go ahead and leave it there. But say I want to create a local variable called I int local. I want worth 5. I can also echo that, just add it on there. An echo isn't processing any commands. It is a / command, but it's not processing anything. It's just showing up within your MQ2 window, so it doesn't hurt anything no matter what you have here. So let's take a look at this. It should say test 5. Test 5. Now you can declare all the different types of variables. As I mentioned, if you don't declare something, so if I remove this 5, it should now say test 0. Test 0. As I mentioned, there's all sorts of different variables. The primary ones are the string, the integer, the timers, boolean, and then floating point. So some things are specific values, so I know that for the macro request commands, a lot of that is floating integers because it's a time-based and decimal point-based, so I need to use a float if I want to access that information. So now that I have these variables, as you can see, I declared some with values, others I didn't declare with a value. I'm able to change that value later by using some of the commands listed on the MQ2 wiki site. So if I want to set or change my variables, there's 3 commands depending on what I want to do. There's a var data if I want to directly access an MQ2 top level object. There's a var calc if I'm using a math calculation with an integer, or there's a var set that will set any variable, and it can set the other two as well. So this is a two-step process if you're doing one of these. So it does the same thing, it just does it in two steps, and this does it in one step. Saves a little bit of time if you're doing a bunch of number crunching or a bunch of top level object access, but otherwise var set is easier to use probably. So now that I have these values, what am I going to do with them? Well, I want to set them, so I can do a var set. I will leave echo there. So say I want to var set my name to taco, and then I want to var calc I to be I, its previous value, plus 10. So now I'm going to echo before I do it, and then change the values, and then echo after I do it. And then I'm going to run that in request. And as I can see, it's test 0, taco 10. If I run it again, you'll see that all the variables were either local or outer, which means that they all deleted themselves as soon as the macro finished. So as soon as the set macro has ended, values reset, which means if I repeat it again, it's going to do the exact same thing. So 0, test 0, and taco 10. If it's a global, it would have stayed in there, and the value wouldn't have changed. It would have given me an error. But a global means that it is going to exist even if the macro shuts down. So I can show you an example of the var data. And this is, once again, if you're actually directly accessing a top level object, you don't use the $ and brace. That's how you enclose your variables if you want to access them normally, but for var data, you don't do that. So this is a top level object I know from looking at the wiki. So now I can echo that as well. And just look at the different results. There we go, it's a floating point processor, or floating point. This is the number that it comes up with. You can see the changes back and forth. If I would have tried to set this as a string or something else, it would have given me an error. You have to match the types as much as possible. A string can be anything as long as you're using a var set. So I could have done var set my name as, and that would have worked because it's a var set. But if I would have tried to do var data as this, it would have returned an error. And I can just show you that error. See that? Now that gave me an error because you can't do a different type if you're doing var data. So as I mentioned, I can get rid of my variables by deleting them. So say I've created this variable MQ running. If I want to get rid of it, I can just delete var MQ running, and now it no longer exists. And that's a simple way to get rid of variables if you don't want them anymore and they're not a local. So that covers the basics of creating variables, having the different scopes, having the different types. The one thing I didn't cover were arrays. They're a little more complicated, but if you're doing a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional string, so think of it as a post office box. That's a series of boxes, and all the information is related together. You can create an array. So if I wanted to have two different rows of 10, it could be a 10 by 2 array, and then that would be 2 rows of 10 boxes. And then each of those boxes, say I want to have my current hit points and current mana for 10 different players. I could store that in box 1 and box 2. So it would be current hit points for player 1 is in box 1, current mana for player 1 is in box 1, 2, and then current hit points for player 2 is in box 2, 1, and current mana is in box 2, 2, and so on and so forth down the line. Arrays are very useful if you're using categories or classes of information that all directly relate to each other. If you're going to use an array, make sure that you're using it not as a timer, and probably make sure that it's all just grouped together, because it starts getting very difficult to conceptualize if you don't have something that's linked together.